Okay, great. Is everybody admitted into the room?
Yes, everyone is in.
Anybody that wants to be.
Okay, I didn't know if there's still anybody in the waiting room, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll welcome everybody to the final installation of the Business Owner Success Series titled Social Responsibility. This is being presented by the Small Business Owner Committee, which is a part of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. So my name is Frank Rivera. I am the chair of the Small Business Owner Committee, and I'm joined here by other members of my committee, Roger Chavla and Kent Palmer. We thank you very much for attending the final chapter in our 10-part series, Social Responsibility. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Kent, who will introduce our well-acclaimed speaker.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to greet all of you today. Welcome aboard to our Business Owner Success Series. Grateful for those who have participated throughout a 10-part workshop series. Glad to have you along. We hope these have been of value to you, that you've learned some aspects of managing and running your business that in some cases may be new and in other cases probably are reminders. We're glad today to have Rick Lochner with us. He is the president of RPC Leadership and Associates. Rick is well known throughout the Chamber of Commerce. He's a frequent public speaker. He's also the chairman of the Corporate Social Responsibility Committee at the Chamber. I hope I got the title right, Rick.
I head up the programming committee. Beth Lopez is the chair of the larger committee, but I head up the programming subcommittee.
For social responsibility. Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. So Rick's work involves helping business owners make leadership a way of life. He holds a master's degree as well as an MBA, is an adjunct professor at Aurora University, and teaches in a variety of graduate topics, including leadership, organizational communications, and strategic management. He is, as I mentioned, a popular public speaker, provides a lot of workshops on leadership in particular, and understanding diversity and effectively managing change and so on. He's also an author, has published a number of books, also related to these same topics of entrepreneurship and leadership. So it's great to have Rick back with us. He enjoys doing this sort of thing, and we always enjoy having him do it. So Rick, we're going to turn the time to you. Look forward to hearing you today. Thank you for being with us.
All right, thanks so much, Kent. And it's a pleasure to be back. I felt kind of privileged that of the 10-part series, I actually got to speak. This is my second time speaking to this audience. So it's because I always have a, being a small business owner myself, I have obviously a bit of a soft spot for small businesses and the challenges and the things that they go through, wearing the multiple hats that they do. So as Kent said, I am on the Corporate Social Responsibility Committee as I head up the programming efforts that I and a handful of volunteers that help bring the programming to the chamber membership and those that also outside membership that choose to join. But it's really, this idea, the reason I joined the Social Responsibility Committee is because it is an integral part of the leadership and business coaching practice that I've led up or headed up for the last 13 years. So it's often, and that's part of the conversation this morning, is it is a part of it. It's not a side gig, if you will. It's, social responsibility is, is something that is that encompasses, as we'll talk about, a variety of different areas that are all important to 21st century sustained success especially for business owners, but especially for small business owners. So that's how we're going to tackle it today. Corporate social responsibility through the eyes of the small business owner. And the conversation I want to keep as light and lively as possible. If there is, if Kent or Franklin or somebody can kind of watch the chat, but I'd be more than happy to kind of keep this light and lively, is because we have 80 minutes to go through a variety of different topics. And if you have any questions about what that means or in what context that impacts you as a small business owner, then by all means feel free to ask that, because that's really the idea. It's not just knowing that what social responsibility is, it's a function of what does it mean to me as a business owner within a community, especially a small business owner. So today we'll talk about the things I've listed here on the slide. What is it? That's like a lot of things in business. Before we can have a meaningful conversation about what it means to us, I think we all have to agree on what it is. And so we're going to spend some time talking about what is corporate social responsibility, and quite frankly, why do we care? I'll talk a little bit about the small business owner mind shift, and then we'll talk about the value of each of the moving parts of social responsibility, because quite frankly, if you can monetize and measure it, then we can really embrace the value that it has to our business, not just from a financial standpoint. And as always, if you've ever heard me speak before, you know that I always end my presentations with a call to action, because without action, there is, we've had a nice conversation for 80 minutes, but without any action, then it really doesn't have the impact that it could have to your business. Ironically, Friday, I'm actually a speaker for a virtual conference of coaches across the country, and the topic that I'm speaking on is taking action. So action obviously is a very critical piece of all of our success. And so a call to action is always part of these conversations. So let's get started with what it is. What is corporate social responsibility? So if you look at the definition that I have here, it's a set of voluntary best practices embedded in a company's culture and business processes that produce an overall positive impact. So just from that definition, just shout out what are some of the key words you see in that definition? Just anybody, just what are some of the key words you see in that definition so far?
Voluntary.
Okay, it's voluntary. And why did that stick out to you?
I don't know. It just seems like most things are mandated. So hearing voluntary seems to have more of a, I guess, buy-in, I would think. Sure.
And what's interesting about the idea of being voluntary, right? And it's not mandated, but a lot of things in small business, what is mandated is, I'm sure we're all familiar with this concept of client demand, right? Without client demand, what good does it make to have, what good is it to have a large supply if the demand is not there? So while it is voluntary, as we'll see through the presentation, it's an expectation. So what else? What other keywords do you see here?
Embedded.
Embedded. In what? Why did that stick out to you?
Well, the part about the embedded in a company's culture sticks out because in my mind, as a business owner, I think of our philosophy, and that determines our process and procedures. And so if your philosophy is not including, some of these best practices, then it's going to be reflected in how you treat your customers, how your employees feel within your culture, right. Just the overall feeling that you're putting out into the world from your company and within your own organization.
I love that explanation for a couple of different reasons. One is that a lot of small business owners, and by the way, small businesses, entrepreneurs, roughly, 40% of my business. But a lot of small businesses, when you mention culture, they say, well, I'm a small business. Well, okay, so am I. I'm a solopreneur, but I have a culture. My org chart fills an entire PowerPoint slide as a solopreneur. And so when we think about culture, I love the fact that you recognize that it's embedded in the culture. It's not a side gig. Social responsibility is not a side gig. It's not you take care of it over here. It's an embedded philosophy built in, which underpins and foundations and informs pretty much everything you do. Cool. What else do we see?
Positive impact.
Positive impact. And why did that jump out to you?
Because it needs to be positive. As a small business owner, we have to be positive every day, because again, wearing so many hats, and if we go down the negative path, then it just ripples and it just creates negative energy.
And what's interesting about it, I couldn't agree with you more, Roger. By the way, Inner Courage Counseling, I didn't get your, can't see your name, so I apologize. What was your name?
Brittany Roback.
I'm sorry?
Brittany Roback.
Brittany. Okay, thanks, Brittany.
Yeah, I apologize for my video being off. I have my little one with me, so I've just for less distraction.
I was on a call this morning, and I mentioned the fact that over the last 15 months, I've met more kids, dogs, cats, and spouses than I ever would have had I had face-to-face meetings. So, I appreciate that. But this idea of impact is, even the word impact by itself, when I ask small business owners, what impact are you having on society? They kind of look at me like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what do you think it means? Right. And so, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later on in the presentation. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the typical numbers that business owners look at, but impact transcends those numbers. So it's when you really think of how you're having impact on society, positive impact, obviously, then that changes the mindset a bit from just looking at your output. So great observation. So let's take a look at another angle here that says, it's a way a company manifests its values in the day-to-day, but yet holding itself socially accountable to stakeholders in the community. And so going back to Brittany's comments, it just, culture is a manifestation of a set of values. So the challenge I have for many small businesses, okay, what are those values? If I looked up each of your websites, do you have vision or a mission or a set of values, posted on your website for things that say, yeah, here's what we stand for. And so that's really the manifestation. What you do relative to social responsibility is going to manifest those values. If you do nothing, that's a manifestation of values or not values. And it's not a judgment thing, but it's something that, as you'll see as we go through the presentation, matters to the market. And that's really why we're having this conversation, because quite frankly, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, 30 years ago when I first entered the corporate market, it may not have mattered as much as it does today. So, and of course, I love the graphic at the bottom, because that's one of the pushbacks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. One of the pushbacks is, well, corporate social responsibility, Rick, that's for the IKEAs of the world. That's for the Walmarts of the world. No, it isn't. As we go through all 4 platforms of social responsibility, I can give you examples of how RPC Leadership Associates plays in each one of those 4 platforms. So as a solopreneur, I can give examples of how we practice social responsibility in all 4 categories. Are they earth-shattering? Not necessarily, but are they contributory? Absolutely. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here relative to social responsibility. So categorically, it's really built on a platform of these primary collaborations. We look at volunteerism, we're looking at philanthropy, we're looking at sustainability, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are the four, and we think of them as, you can think of them as, planks or legs of a table. They're collaborations. And when we say collaboration, what are we implying here? Anybody? When you say these are collaborations,
Well, they work
between
together. They work
exactly. So there's action associated with there's an active conversation between multiple parties. So in this case, the parties being business and the community, because one of the things that as I work with nonprofits, which are part of this, obviously with volunteerism and philanthropy, as I work with nonprofits, one of the key challenges is, who are you partnering with? And as I talk to small businesses, who are you partnering with in the nonprofit community? Because this is a collaboration. They both need each other. They may not realize it, but they both do, in order to survive in this 21st century world that we work in. So what I'm going to do is go through each one of these, and just so we're level set on, when we talk about each one, what do we really mean? What do we mean by each one of these relative to social responsibility? So volunteerism, the practice of providing time and providing the time for the benefit of other, for causes. Dang it, sorry about that. There you go. For the benefit of other people and causes rather than financial benefit. So we're giving of our time. In a business context, when we talk about volunteerism, we're talking about how is the company, affording its employees and associates the time and tools to support volunteer efforts, right? And so, we'll talk about each one of them and what it is, but then we'll talk about the value, because there's obviously some obstacles to why businesses don't look at it this way, but we'll talk through that. But in a business context, it really is about how are you structuring, or how are you allowing your associates or yourself the opportunity to volunteer within the community. The Naperville Chamber just had a big volunteer volunteer week back in late April that helped quite a few organizations throughout the community, thanks to the volunteer efforts, pandemic notwithstanding, to help those in need. So the next thing we talk about is philanthropy. In this sense, we're talking about generosity of more of the broader sense: time, talent, and treasure, time, skills, and money to make life better for other people. And so, as you can see here, just the word itself means love of humanity. So when we talk about philanthropy, we're talking about more of a long-term problem-solving, societal problem-solving idea that in many cases uses volunteerism as a means to that end. The next thing we want to talk about is sustainability. And when we mention sustainability, a lot of people think of sustainability as just being green. We recycle, we take care of the planet, things of that nature. But in its truer sense, it means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And so Kent mentioned I have written several books. I have a series of books called The Missing Piece, series. I've written a version for entrepreneurs, which would be primarily this audience. But the subtitle in every single one is about achieving sustainable growth, sustainable profits, sustainable programs. It's all about being able to not just be a one-hit wonder, to be able to sustain that business. And so sustainability in the broader sense covers these three areas: economic development, social development, and environmental protection. If you've ever heard the term triple bottom line, it speaks to this idea of sustainability in a broader sense. The triple bottom line idea means profit from operations, which would be the economic piece, profit from community collaboration, so that would be the social piece, and then profit from environmental operations or programs. And so it really transcends this idea of the only profit that matters is that from operations, to the degree that it created a whole new category of corporation. Now we have, I know of at least one B corporation within the chamber. I'm sure there are more, but so it's a simple acknowledgement that sustainability is an important part of social responsibility, or sustainability is an important part of social responsibility. And then the last piece, which has obviously garnered many headlines within the last 15 months, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we'll break down each one of these, and so we're clear on what we're really talking about. As you can see here, the presence of differences that include underrepresented populations among the practitioners in business, and that may be marginalized in broader society. And so one of the things that, one of the changes in the diversity conversation is this idea that, those of us that are, maybe, looking at the conversation 20, 30 years ago heard, the United States is a melting pot. Well, unfortunately, that is a very Eurocentric term. And so it basically said, it prompted this idea that I don't see color, or I don't see that, we're all the same. Well, the mosaic idea, which is what's represented here, is that we do see color, we do see differences, and we look for those differences. And so the mosaic is really a more of a better graphical representation than this old mantra of the melting pot. Then we get into this idea of equity. And one of the challenges here is that oftentimes we confuse equity with equality. They are not the same. Equity is about justice, impartiality, and fairness. So, when we look at the processes, procedures, and distribution of resources, how is the fairness built into that? So fairness, and many of you may have seen the graphic. There's three kids of all different sizes trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. Equality means they all get the same size box to stand on. Well, that may or may not work for everybody. Equity means that they all get a box that helps them see over the fence. And so it's this idea of equity is also part of the social responsibility. And my challenge to businesses is always, how is fairness represented in your culture? Then the last piece of this, obviously, is the inclusion idea. And as you can see here from the definition, it's an outcome. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, oftentimes, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we don't complete the conversation to land on inclusion. We oftentimes short the conversation by landing on diversity and/or equity. But inclusion is an outcome when diverse individuals are able to participate fully in the decision and development opportunities within an organization. And so it's a function of the culture. You can be a diverse looking organization because diversity is primarily based on demographics. As you can see on the slide, we've got the typical demographics that you see here, but inclusion is really more of based on psychographics, because that's when you think about culture and you think about the way people think, that's where inclusion is really going to make its mark, because it's based on attitudes and beliefs rather than simple behaviors that can be modified and adapted to any particular situation. So with that, we'll just take a quick pause. What questions do you have, about the four collaborations that we just talked about, and how it might, and how does that resonate, through the lens of a small business owner? Any questions in the chat, or any questions?
There are not questions in the chat. I will tell you that your discussion of each of these on this last slide, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and explaining a more modern approach to all three of them, has really opened my eyes to something that I did not fully understand or appreciate until today. The contrast that you made between a melting pot and a mosaic, and the contrast you made about equality and equity, that had a big impact for me. I think I'm a fairly informed person, but you really added to my understanding here today. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate that, Kent. It's also one of the reasons why we go through this process on the front end to understand definitions and really where we're going from, because a lot of the discourse, if you will, especially around DEI, is simply a matter of, you say potato, I say potato, and we're gonna sit here and argue about that.
Right.
So it's really a worthwhile time to really understand that. So I appreciate that insight. Anybody else before we move to the next slide?
Yeah, I had a question, Rick. This is Roger Chavla. When you get into this discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more importantly, like at corporate America, I mean, they're doing a big push towards diversity and equity, but I think there's a big issue with inclusion. I just wanted to get your opinion on that. I mean, it's not a today issue or a one-year issue. It's kind of like a systemic issue.
So you are correct. In that, matter of fact, you'll see from when we talk about the value of DEI, I'll jump ahead, but the title is too much focus on diversity, not enough focus on inclusion. And that is because inclusion is in fact based on attitudes and beliefs, and it's deeply embedded. And so, one of the mantras that, when people ask me what I do, my quick answer is I'm in the attitude adjustment business, because fundamentally that is what I'm about. I'm about changing people's attitudes about how they lead. And in the 21st century, if you've got some outdated attitudes about LGBTQ, gender equality, racial equality, if you got some outdated ideas, you can hide behind diversity only so long, by putting out a diverse front. But I can argue that the only diversity that counts, and we can go offline and agree or disagree, but the only diversity that counts is cognitive diversity. And that is diverse thinking, because I can put together a team that looks diverse, but if they all think the same, then what do we really have? And we haven't really accomplished the end game, which is inclusion. And when you have inclusion where everybody thinks the same, you get groupthink, and that's a whole different set of problems. So I agree with you 100%. And when I do, one of the topics that is getting more traction, I've got 3 and 4 hour workshops around this topic specifically, where we can do a deep dive and really dive into what are those attitudes and beliefs that are underpinning the idea, the way we think and act around this particular topic.
Rick, you asked a question about what does that mean to the small business owner? And I think you may have mentioned this, but I think a lot of times we hire for the skill set, not for what you just mentioned, the diversity of thinking, the cognitive diversity. And I know I recently had to hire for my marketing department. And one thing I did was run DISC profiles on anybody that I was considering to bring on board, because I'm a D. I'm pretty sure you're probably a D as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're probably right.
Yeah. But, I didn't want a bunch of Ds. I didn't want a bunch of S's. I needed to look at all of those things, see how well the team would mesh prior to even moving forward in the process. So, for the business owner, I think it's important not just to hire for skill set, but to hire for those psychographics that you mentioned right there.
Yeah, one of the interesting spins is, some of I've done a lot of presentations around generational diversity. I think I've done probably 6 or 7 just for the chamber over the last couple of years. And so one of the things I do is when we talk about, it seems easier to talk about age differences, but then I simply change age to race, and all of a sudden now the conversation gets wonky. We get squirrely. Now we can't, and all I did was change one word in the question from age to race, or age to gender even, and it gets so this idea of being able to really embrace it attitudinally is an important part of this. It's part of the mind shift, that all business owners have to take on, and I appreciate that, Franklin, because it's just one small way to say, okay, am I a little bit too homogenous here? All right, so let's jump into why do we care? So according to Experian, the average age of a small business owner is just over 50 years old. So, that's just a data point that says, if we look across all the small businesses, and by the way, I think the statistic is 99% of businesses in the country are small businesses. And so as we look across that, so we just on the average, in the aggregate, we're essentially looking at social responsibility through the eyes of a 50-year-old. According to multiple studies, the primary driving force behind social responsibility initiatives are the millennials. And of course, you can see here where, they sit between 24 and 40 years old at this point, and they are the largest generation in the workforce. And so the point being that we had touched on earlier in this conversation was, yes, social responsibility is voluntary, but ignore it at your own risk, because the largest workforce cares about it. And the influencers, if you will, the ones that are coming into their own, and especially the 35 to 40-year-olds, are coming into it through the lens of their millennial view of the world, and that may or may not connect well with the older Gen X, or even some of the younger baby boomers who are still running businesses in the market today. So it matters to the group that is large and in charge. So, while it, again, may be voluntary, it's something that obviously we as small businesses should pay attention to. And then, according to this particular Institute on Social Innovation, social responsibilities have the potential to, and I'll just rattle off a bunch of statistics, and you can pick and choose, which one might matter to you the most. But, market value, reduce risk, cost of debt, price premiums. Interestingly enough, it's, people will pay more for those businesses that promote social responsibility as part of their culture, as part of their care and collaboration with the community that they serve. So, and then of course, staff turnover. I mean, who hasn't heard the tale of I can't find people in this current market? And so if you can reduce turnover even a little bit, you've got this idea that people will stick around because of the business cares about some of these issues. And the point is, you don't have to be involved in all four, but you have to look at what makes the most sense for your business and be in the game. So let's look at how we shift this business owner mindset for social responsibility initiatives to truly take hold. So it really is about thinking about the impact of the business versus an eye on the numbers. What typically happens is you focus on the numbers with an eye on impact. In other words, the numbers come first. But what I'm suggesting is that it's the impact of your business, your vision, your mission, your culture, your values. What impact are you trying to make? And then how do you measure that? And one of the things that we get caught up in, and this is one of the things I write about in my Missing Piece series of books, is this idea of lagging indicators versus leading indicators. So you can see from the diagram that that you can deliver output. Whatever sort of business you're in, you produce an output, and that's great. But what are the outcomes from that, and what impact does that have? And Dan, I know you're on the call, but Dan does a great job of advertising his work relative to working with those with cancer, for instance. And I know it just because I see it. He markets that, he doesn't do it strictly for money. He does it because I know he cares. And so that's just an example of, I think, where you focus on that impact, and you don't stop looking just at output. So an example of a lagging metric, and I know it's everybody's favorite, but profit. Profit is a lagging indicator. Profit is simply the output of a decision you made 60 days ago or 90 days ago, right? It's not in real time. Client loyalty is a leading indicator. The metrics that say, yes, I'm having an impact, and client loyalty is however which way you measure that. There's some very straightforward ways of doing that that we can talk offline, but that's a leading indicator. That means that the more they keep coming back to your business, is a sign of loyalty, but also means that you don't have to, the cost of sale goes down every time they keep coming back. A significant financial impact. So with that in mind, what questions do we have at this point as far as shifting our mindset and the value that it has to our business? Hopefully I didn't put you on the spot, Dan, but I just know that you play in that space.
No, Rick, I appreciate that. And I guess I've never looked at it as the return on the investment, but just hearing you talk about it, it must be working.
Yeah. And that, you think countless people, I'm sure, appreciate that. What other thoughts or questions that this idea of making sure our mind shift is right?
Are you, so a thought just popped into my head, and I'm wondering if this is what you're sort of getting at is, so what we do in our business and the way we serve our customer, we think of that sometimes as our brand. But I'm hearing you say today that how I treat people, how I think about others, how I include others, may be more of my brand than what I actually do with my customers. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned brand. You know, the brand is what other people tell you matters, right? And so, you know, as what I'm suggesting is that, yes, part of that brand is going to be that you produce quality services and products. But another part of that brand is how you participate in the community.
Yeah, because I hear people a lot of times when someone will say, hey, do you know somebody that can do this? And the other person is then referring somebody to them. They say, oh, she's great, or she's really nice, or she's very kind, or something. They almost don't even say anything about what kind of work they do. It's what kind of person they are.
Right. And it really is, if nothing else, to take away from these last couple of slides, introduce impact into your conversation. Here's the impact that we have. You know, if I just go back to looking at, okay, the output, you know, I can count up the coaching hours. I mean, that's easy. The outcome is that obviously the people I work with over time get better at what they do. But the impact is the teams that report to them get better at what they do. So when you think about the impact that a single coach can have on just how multiple businesses that they work with can improve, nonprofit organizations, for-profit businesses, make a difference, that's impact. And that's what I focus on. And I can tell stories about impact, you know, because you're right, Kent, nobody cares about how many coaching hours I did.
Right.
I mean, nobody even cares whether I'm a certified coach or not, which I'm not, but that hasn't, you know, most CEOs don't look up that credential or care about that credential. They care about how can I help them do what they do.
I say that a lot to people who come to me for help with either a job search or starting a business, and they want to tell me about their 20 years of experience. And I always say, nobody cares about your 20 years of experience. What they care about is what you did for somebody, how you actually changed somebody's situation. That's what matters.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Rick,
Go ahead, Roger.
You had another question, and that is, like, as a business owner, one can understand and appreciate, you know, the social impact and all the things we're talking about, but how does that one impart that to the team? Because their set of social values could be not totally aligned with, you know, the business owners' social, everything we're talking about here. And how often does that alignment or reinforcement or touch point need to happen?
Well, there's really two parts to that question. One is when the staff don't align with the business owner on what that social responsibility is. You know, one of the things we talk about that we embedded into the toolkit, which I will introduce here towards the end. The CSR committee created a toolkit that helps you start those conversations. You know, it doesn't really matter that, you know, you may have a group that just likes to volunteer. You may have a group that is passionate about sustainability, and you know, the business owner themselves may be, you know, looking at, you know, diversity and inclusion. So there may be some differences in where they want to play. The only concern I would have is an associate who could care less about any of it. Because then I would argue that if you have somebody who doesn't care about any of it, then you've got somebody who's probably got an attitude that is misaligned to your culture. The second part of that is, I actually forget the second part. Yeah, what was the second part of your question, Roger?
Well, I just, is there a frequency to where you need to have
Oh, that's what it was.
communicate these values to the team just to make sure there's consistent alignment, you know?
Well, the question there is, how often do you communicate your values in general? Because that's your answer. If you're not embedding the values and cultural component into your daily interactions, then you're missing the point, or you're missing an opportunity. And so, you know, when I go back to my corporate experience and corporate career, every job I had within the corporate realm or in the business realm was, of course, I'd have regular day-to-day conversations, but then I'd always publish a monthly newsletter. And when you printed it, the header had the vision statement that printed out in the company colors, and the footer had the mission statement printed out in the company colors. And somewhere, at least once in that newsletter, was a reference to somebody did a great thing for a client. You know, we improved a process, but I always related it back to the vision and mission. And so that became a normal part of the conversation because it embeds why we do what we do. And so I would say the answer to your question is, how often do you have conversations about values in general, whether they specifically include diversity or sustainability or any of the others that we've talked about? Whatever your value set is, should be part of the regular conversation with staff, because it reinforces why you do what you do, not just what you do. Does that help?
Yeah, very much.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on now and talk about, okay, so we understand how we need to think differently. So let's look at the value of each one of these planks relative to small business. So the first obstacle, obviously, if you're a small business, you're probably thinking, okay, if they're volunteering, and we're not talking about volunteering off hours, sometimes we're talking about volunteering during the day. And so if they're volunteering off hours, then they're not working. What's up with that? So part of it is, you know, there is probably no cheaper employee development or skill development than volunteering. You know, coming from somebody who's spent a lot of time volunteering, either on boards or at this point in my life, primarily through boards, either advisory boards or board of directors, you know, you develop those skill sets. Young workers, for instance, struggle with social skills, soft skills. You know, younger workforce that grew up, you know, looking at a 2x3 inch screen as their primary means of communication, often struggle with some of the soft skills. And so volunteering gives them opportunities to develop those soft skills. You know, looking at a sense of belonging, you know, that matters to the millennial generation and the generation behind them, Generation Z. That, and yes, in case you're wondering, there is a Generation Alpha. So, but that's for a different presentation. So it really is, you know, it's measured through how satisfied are you working for the company that you work for. And part of their criteria is going to be this idea that we give back to the community in whatever form or fashion that is. And to Kent's question earlier, how the brand is perceived in the community is going to impact their buying decisions. I mean, it's part of it. It's, hey, I see, you know, I saw that, you know, I know Magnatech does a lot of volunteering. They're an IT company here in town, and they have bright orange shirts. You know, they volunteer. You see them, they're visible. You can see what they're doing. Bob Young Painting, he has the bright green shirts. They're visible, they volunteer, they do stuff for the community. So it's all part of the brand that people see. So that's it. It's important to understand these things can be measured. Employee satisfaction can be measured. Brand recognition can be measured. And so as you look at what that makes, and again, brand is what the customers tell you, not what you tell the customers. Anybody that tells me what their brand is, first question I'm going to ask is, what are you basing that on? Is that what your marketing department is telling you, or is that what your customers are telling you? So that's really the litmus test for brand, but relative to volunteerism. Philanthropy. Okay, so I'm giving money, but what are they using it for? That's really a key question. So nonprofits work like any other business. They are providing impact, or their vision and mission is to provide impact, but it is to do it in a meaningful way, in a profitable way, profit, at least to the sense that they generate revenue, but they don't necessarily focus on generating profit, obviously. But if one of the questions I ask is, when I get a small business owner, especially, who asks me, well, how do I know what they're using the money for? What I ask the small business owner is, how do you know what impact you're making in the community? And so, you combine your sense of, needing the revenue to do what you do, and their sense of purpose, mash that together, and the for-profit community can learn that sense of purpose from the nonprofit community, and the nonprofit community can benefit from the business partnership for business. So it really is, if you're going to be philanthropic, or you're going to donate to a cause one way or the other, simply ask, look at the dollars invested and look at the impact that they're having. I have in my financial statements, I have a percentage carved out of net for philanthropic charitable contributions. Whatever, as we grow, that number grows. And so but I still ask the question, I'm not just going to donate it for the sake of donating it. I'm going to donate it to a cause, that matters to me, and one that says, okay, can explain to me what those dollars are being used for to help grow their business. It's an expectation you would have of yourself should somebody ask, what are you doing with all the money you're making? What are you doing with the profit? Questions on the first two, volunteering or philanthropy? Okay, so then let's look at the value of sustainability. And here's where we get into, oh yeah, Rick, that only benefits large companies. Well, on some level, yes, because it's simple scope and scale. The larger the company, the more you put into it, the greater the benefit is going to be. However, whatever your view is on climate change, and that's a key topic for this whole sustainability conversation, nearly 3/4 of American consumers base their buying decision based on activity related to climate change. And keep in mind, if 3/4 of Americans are making this buying decision, and the largest generation in the workforce are millennials, you put those two together and you say, okay, they're going to make those buying decisions. They have the power. They're the largest population in the workforce. They may not have all the money relative to investments and the like, because the baby boomers still hold a lot of that, but they're the buyers. And if they're the buyers, it matters to them. Here's a couple of statistics and I pulled this right out of the CSR toolkit. It can generate 50 to 80% increase in profits over 5 years. And here's something to pay attention to, but by doing nothing, it can also decrease your profitability. And so it's not just a function of I'm just going to ignore it. There's a negative impact to doing nothing, but a positive impact to doing something. The book that you see on the right-hand side of the slide is the book that it's called A Common Sense Approach to Sustainability, which I was a contributing author to back in 2012. And so we have early on, we saw where sustainability was an important part of the leadership conversation. And it, once again, is just part of, not a side gig. And last but not least, the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So too much short-term focus on diversity, not enough long-term focus on inclusion. Keep in mind, diversity is the means to the inclusion end. Just think of it in those terms. And so I pulled a couple of statistics from Juliet Bork's book, Which Two Heads Are Better Than One. First one is inclusive organizations are twice as likely to meet financial targets than non-inclusive organizations. So you tell me what does twice as likely to meet financial targets mean to your small business? Is that meaningful? Does it matter? Does it have impact to, does it get your attention as a small business owner to say, twice as likely to hit financial targets if I'm engaged in this community collaboration on some level, it should matter. Once again, it can be measured and it can be monetized. The second one, inclusive organizations are 8 times more likely to have better business outcomes than non-inclusive. So not just necessarily financial targets, but just better business outcomes, quality, financial, process, employee engagement, all of these things, 8 times more likely. Now, what does that mean to a small business? Any thoughts? I know that's probably calculus, right? 8 times. I mean, you can't even carry the 1 on that one. The point of it all is that this is, and I love it when they had the protests in Naperville, there were some dialogue around, here's what some of the businesses are doing, they're what I call sanitized press releases, just to show that they're doing something. And I love some of the comments back where, look at your board, look at your leadership team, and really focusing on the action, because people do care about that. They're not going to, they're no longer going to buy into these sanitized press releases. And just because you throw $1 million at an initiative doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily change the inclusion at your leadership level, or the diversity at your leadership level or your board level. And so it's, if you want these kinds of outcomes, then obviously the action has to match. Questions or thoughts on not just the value of DEI to a small business, but the value of any of the 4 planks that we just talked about? Okay, then as we wrap it up, we can summarize with, some of the key takeaways. It is a set of voluntary best practices embedded in the company's culture, embedded in the culture. So if you look at your culture, and you should be able to define your culture in a tangible way, and look and see where do these collaborations play into that culture, and more importantly, into the business processes. So because it's culture people don't always see everything that encompasses a culture, but they see the behavior, because culture by definition are the attitudes, beliefs, norms, etc., that underpin the behavior of the organization. So they see the behavior, and if they don't see social responsibility built into the business processes, simple reverse engineering is going to suggest that there really isn't much care in the company culture for this collaboration, this societal collaboration. Obviously, the primary driving force behind social responsibility is also the largest generation in the workforce. And so while it is voluntary, it's something to pay attention to. And then looking at traditional metrics that are traditional lagging indicators are really not going to tell you the story as leading indicators would, to give you that sense of, yes, here's the impact that we're having, because that is what buyers are looking for. That is what your future employees are looking for. They're looking for, what impact are you having? And if you don't have a narrative that makes sense about the impact that you have to the community that you serve, then you're going to come up short. You're going to be towards the end of that line for people that are going to buy your services and products, and people that are going to want to work for your business. Final thoughts or questions? Anything in the chat, Kent, that
there's not questions in the chat. There's a couple of interesting comments. Beth, early on in our conversation about branding, posted this little phrase that she likes. Marketing is asking someone on a date. Branding is why they say yes. I thought that was kind of insightful, I guess. It's kind of cute, but I like it. And then the other comment is from Doug. He says, client loyalty fosters sustainability. So in turn, does that also fuel the reputation and volunteerism and everything that you do? So client loyalty fosters sustainability, which in turn fuels reputation, volunteerism. So those were the comments there. We're getting some more from Brittany and Brett now. Brittany says, how do we get access to the CSR toolkit? And specifically how to have difficult conversations that you've mentioned here today. So that might be one for you to start on, and I'll bring up the others.
The difficult conversations, interestingly enough, are it starts with what we agree on as a foundation, and then moves on to the parts that we disagree on. So the answer to the first question is on the next slide. So I've included the link to download the CSR toolkit, which covers a lot of the material that we covered on this slide. But the difficult conversations, one of the things that in any sort of difficult conversation, you have to be comfortable with conflict. Now, statistically, 75% of society avoids conflict, will flee instead of embrace the conflict itself. So that, go ahead.
No,
right. So that's a challenge in and by itself, right? If only 25% of society is even willing to step in or lean into that conflict at first blush, and then of course 10% of them, so basically 40% of that 25% are going to overreact. So they're going to go crazy. They're going to, just get all animated and really create more problems than not, based on an overreaction. So what that says is really only about 15% of society is comfortable with just handling conflict the right way right out of the gate. And so part of having that difficult conversation is really looking in the mirror and saying, okay, how comfortable am I with conflict? Because communication is both the cause and the cure. And so as you look at being able to have, you can't resolve a conflict in email, for instance, nor can you do it over social media. It has to be a face-to-face, and it has to be has to start with a place of, here's what we both agree on, and then we can take that conversation out to the parts where we don't agree. And so as I've for instance had these DEI, I do these DEI workshops, I don't shy away from the fact I will literally ask participants, so what events, or matter of fact, I did it on a chamber presentation around DEI, and what events influence the way you think about diversity, about inclusion, about race, about lifestyle orientation, about gender, etc. Just having those conversations, understanding why they think the way they do, is really the only way you then get to, okay, then if that's the way you think now, how do we move it to a more productive way of thinking for the growth of the business?
There's an old saying that goes, understanding begins with listening.
Yes.
You've got to listen to each other to really understand where they're coming from. The link to the toolkit, I think Beth put that into the chat for everyone. And then
it's also right there.
There it is. That's the one. And Doug asked some questions for you to consider. He's talking about how social responsibility should help nonprofits as well as a business to increase revenue and profitability and so on. He asked, what's the best way of creating more inclusive leadership? Or in other words, how would one go about recruiting it? And what kind of best practices would you suggest, or maybe they're available someplace?
So you're talking specifically around inclusion. Okay. Inclusion is, there's, and I'll add to Beth's, mantra, if you will. Diversity is being asked to the dance, or, asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Right. And so when you think of it in those terms, inclusion is really nothing more than saying, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Right. And doing that across the board, not just from your favorite yes people, or, people that will give you an answer that, you'll like. But it's, inclusion involves critical thinking, in the sense that critical thinking is about challenging your assumptions. That's one of the basic premises of critical thinking. And so the only way to challenge your assumptions is to get a viewpoint from somebody who doesn't necessarily share, or maybe doesn't have the same background as you. And from a leadership standpoint, the key there is it culturally safe to do that? Is it, we've heard this term psychological safety. Ironically, the 4 stages of psychological safety, inclusion is the entry level to psychological safety. So they have to feel like they're part of, right? There's that belonging part. And then they have to be able to be vulnerable enough to, can I learn without looking stupid, or feeling like I'm stupid, that I can make mistakes and things of that nature. And then, to what level do I feel like I can raise my hand and contribute without being criticized? Oh, there he goes again. He's, that's not inclusion. And then, of course, the ultimate in psychological safety is the ability to say, boss, I have a different opinion, and here's why. To be able to have that cultural safety to be able to have those kinds of conversations. Now, what I always look at is how secure are you as a leader, right? Security doesn't mean you know all the answers. Security means you know you don't know all the answers, and you're okay with asking people who maybe don't make as much as you or don't have as much experience as you. One of my favorite examples in the generational diversity conversation was, for the first 3 years of my business, I was mentored by somebody half my age. So I didn't have an issue with that. It was around digital marketing. I'm a recovering engineer. I can barely spell marketing, let alone digital marketing. So, I needed that. I needed to be mentored. So it's not always the older mentoring the younger. It's the more experienced mentoring the least experienced. And that has nothing to do with age in a digital world. And so inclusion is about being confident enough to say, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this topic? What do you think we could do better to be more inclusive? That's simply asking. I know that, I've always had that questioning, was never afraid to ask. As a vice president, I had 2 call center agents walk into my office with an idea, and it was a great idea. And when we hashed out the logistics of the idea on their own, they converted the call center scripts from English to Spanish because they were both Hispanic, and said, hey, it would be a lot easier if we could do these in our native language. And I said, fine, sounds like a great idea. And of course, when they were the headline of the next monthly newsletter that I referenced earlier, guess where my inclusion factor went up? Went up significantly, because now people knew that I meant what I said when I said, hey, if you've got an idea and nobody's around, knock on my door. And they did. And that's when they knew Rick was inclusive, because he would at least sit down and listen to their ideas. And even if the idea didn't fly, they were not made to feel like, why are you bothering me? Great question.
Yep. There are no more questions in the chat.
Okay. Any final thoughts or questions from? Okay. So then let's look at what will you do in the next 30 days then to engage your organization based on what you've learned during this presentation. Again, it starts with a conversation. Great questions around, how to have them, but whether you start the conversation yourself or you invite somebody like myself in to help facilitate that conversation, there's a variety of different ways. But it's important to, if you're not doing anything in the space, in the social responsibility space, it's important to start the conversation. And of course, when you get the copy of the presentation, of course, you'll be able to download the CSR toolkit that we've created that has a lot of great information about how to start those conversations and some external resources on where to go. But if all else fails, I'd be more than happy to, just shoot me a note or give me a call. I'd be more than happy to help walk you through it.
Very good.
So I appreciate the opportunity. If there are no further questions, as always, great questions, very much appreciate it.
Rick, as always, outstanding presentation. Really appreciated it.
Thanks, Beth.
Well, thank you, Rick, for your time, your preparation, for the insights that you shared with us today. It really has been a great discussion. For those attending, we've now completed the 10-part series in our Business Owner Success Series of workshops. The Small Business Owner Committee will be considering a new approach. We don't know when the next one will be scheduled, but the Chamber normal lines of communication will be announcing that. We will also have we're inviting new members for this committee. So if you have some interest or know of someone that you would like to recommend, you certainly may make those suggestions and have them contact the chamber. Roger Chawla is also a member of our committee. Roger, is there anything else you would like to say at this point?
I think we've had a great initial, series that they spanned things such as corporate responsibility, like you just had Rick, to PPP planning and everything in between. So I think it encapsulated, I think the small business committee really, the core purpose, again, why you join a chamber, why does a small business join a chamber? I think the small business kind of gets back to basics on why we joined a chamber. And I think the more good people we get on there and make this a sustainable part of the chamber would be really good for the community. So
great. Well, thank you, Roger. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance today. Linda will post this video of the meeting on the Chamber's YouTube channel, and a survey will come to you for your input on the value that this session was. Again, many thanks to you, Rick, and thank you everyone for attending. We'll see you all next time.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ken.
Ken.